One of the first questions that people ask when they're building a web API is, what framework should I use? And today I want to build a small example of web API without using any frameworks or any third-party libraries. And it's going to be a CRUD API, a create, read, update, and delete API, which is generally applicable to pretty much any web application, right? So if you want to build your own version of Twitter, well, you're going to have to create, read, update, and delete tweets, right? If you want to create if you want to have accounts for your web application, well, you need to be able to create, read, update, and delete an account. So this is generally applicable to pretty much any web-based application. And the reason why I want to show an example without any framework is I want to show how you can actually create that if you make your design pretty simple, you can actually do these kinds of things from scratch without any multi-million line libraries or frameworks. And if you do things correctly, you can actually save yourself time over the course of the project. A lot of these frameworks say, hey, you know, it'll get you started really quick, and it makes you think that you'll be very productive. But I've found over time these things actually make things more complicated and make it more difficult to be productive, and that your productivity goes down over time. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and start on this API from scratch. I'm going to create I'm going to make a directory called Widgets API. And so since our API could be anything, we could be doing stuff for tweets or Facebook posts or whatever. We're just going to do a project for widgets, right? So a widget can stand in for anything else, and we're going to create, read, update, and delete our widgets. So we're going to go into here. I'm going to see into our Widgets API directory in both sides, and I'm going to go ahead and create a file in Go. So all of this is going to be created in Go as well. And the reason why is Go is great for these things. It has its standard library is so amazing, and it's perfect for creating these kinds of applications. So we're going to write the thing in Go, and actually it's going to be the main package. Now the other thing you'll probably notice is that I'm probably going to put all of this in like one file. Now as a program gets bigger, you don't want to put everything in one file. You want to organize it. And if you've looked at most of my projects that are on GitHub and just here that I've posted in video, most of these projects are really tiny, right? So there's actually not much structure to them. And I think probably in the future I'll create a video where I go over how to structure a much larger program. But for now, we're just going to make things as simple as possible. So we're going to import some libraries that we're going to need from the standard library. I'm going to import the log and net-http, and we're also going to need, I think, OS, probably IO, and we're probably going to need a couple more things, but that's good to start. We'll create a main function. And then down here, we're going to create a couple data structures to kind of start us off. We're going to create a message data structure. And that's going to have data as a string data and an error. That's going to be a string. And what this is useful for is just sending messages back between the front end and the back end, right? So any data that we want to send to the front end or the back end can go in this data slot, and then the errors we want to communicate can go to the error slot. And that allows us to have like a relatively simple way of communicating between the front and back end. Now the other thing that I'm going to create is a widget, right? Because most of these things are going to be widgets that we're going to be passing around data about. And the widget, we can create anything that we want for this. So let's say we'll have a name. it will have maybe a manufacturer, which will be string and manufacturer, and description, something like that. Doesn't matter. This is just a an example. Description, I think I did that right. And maybe we'll do price or something like that. Float 64. Price. There we go. So that gives us kind of the data structures that we'll need, at least for now. And the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to start creating our endpoints. So an easy way to do endpoints in Go here is to use handle func and then have the endpoint URL that we want. So we're going to do create, and we're going to give it a create handler, and we'll do create, read, update, and delete. Read, update, delete. And we'll do the same thing over here. Read, update, oops, and delete. There we go. And then we'll have a log statement here where we'll say serving at 8080, right? We'll just serve at that particular port. And HTTP listen and serve. We'll do 8080, have that be nil. So now we've got kind of the basics of our main function that will just be our working API. So in the next part, we'll be fleshing out these handler functions, right? So we'll have to do create, read, update, delete handle functions, and then that'll essentially be how we will work things out. So we'll do a func create w HTTP response writer. This will be a request, and let's read, update, delete. Read, update. Okay. I'll put some spaces in between these things. So now we've got our create, read, update, and delete functions. Now let's show how we would actually deal with some of these things. Now, typically what you would do is you'd check the HTTP method, right? Because you want create to be post, and maybe read to be get, update maybe to be patch, and delete to be maybe delete or something like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to use essentially only two HTTP methods. We're going to use post and get, and we're going to differentiate based on just the endpoint, on the action that we want to do. So let's go ahead and do a check on the method. So we're going to check the method. If it's not HTTP, was it method post? Now I'm going to show how we will return errors. Now typically what you would do is you would set the response writer. You'd set a header for the response writer, and you'd set one of the status codes. And in fact, I think I've got the status codes. All right, let's see, Fox. Okay, let's restore the section. So there's these status codes, and there's a whole bunch of them, right? And you'd maybe do like a bad request or something like that. But instead of doing that, what we're going to do is we're going to indicate an error by we're always going to return 200. So the status will actually be okay for everything, but if there's an error, we'll send it in this error slot, right? So that way the front end will just know the error slot. Now, a lot of these things are kind of up to your taste or what kind of standard that you want to code to, right? But the most important part is being consistent for these things. So what we're going to do is we'll do write, and oh, you know what we need for these messages? Let's do, for our data structures, let's have a way to turn them into JSON. So we'll do func in message JSON will return a byte array. And for most of this stuff, I'm going to actually elide the error handling. So I'm not going to do most of the error handling here because I want this to be a relatively swift video. I don't want to spend hours on it. And I want it to be something that can be easily watched. So I'm going to forego most of the error handling that I would normally do in a production setting. So that will allow us to turn the message into a JSON. Let's do the same thing with the widget. Widget. And that will be a W. And so now we have a good way of converting these things into JSON. So for the create method, we're going to need to read the body of the message. So we'll do IO read all and r.body for the request. So that gives us the body, and then we'll do a m for message, and we'll do JSON unmarshal. We'll get the body and the message. Let's make sure that we have, yeah, let's include the JSON library. So useful that Go has essentially all of these things built in. We have an HTTP library and JSON and all that. We don't have to worry about third-party libraries and versions. So now that we've got the body, let's get the widget that we're creating. So we'll do another JSON unmarshal, and we'll convert this into mdata because the user is going to give us data and read that into the widget. So now we have a widget, and then we're going to save it. Now at this point, if you're going to save the widget, you would have some kind of ORM, or you'd have some other kind of layer that would interact with your database. But because we want this to be have a very high brevity, we're going to just use the file system. We're just going to write to files and come back. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a data dir, which will be a string, and it will be data, and there we go, right? So, and over here you'll see we've got a main.go. We're going to make a directory called data, and that way we'll save all of our data in one spot, all of our widgets. So let's go ahead and do os write file, and we'll do widget.name will be the name of the file, and then we'll do, what is this, w.json will give us the bytes, JSON bytes, and then, oh, we'll just use 666. That'll be good. And so that way we'll actually save the thing. Well, let's do read. There we go. So now we'll want to read, and what the user will give us is they'll give us the name of the widget that we want. We're just going to assume that the names of these widgets are unique, and really the idea is just to get the idea behind this stuff, right? So the details don't matter as much, but I want to show something that at least gives an idea of how it works. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to try to read from that data library. Oh, you know what? Back here with this name, we want to write it to the data directory. There we go. And then here, we're going to read from the data directory, and we're going to say, oh, the other thing that we want to do is write this error message. So I wanted to do at least one kind of error message to show how we write errors out. And so the way that we'll write errors out is we'll create a message, and we'll give it error, and we'll say invalid HTTP method want post, and we'll turn that into JSON, write that out, and do a return, and then we'll do essentially the same kind of thing over here, except in this case we want you know what? We actually do want post. We're going to do post for all of these things because when we read, we're going to do a post. And in typical, we're not following the RESTful format at all, because in the RESTful format, you'd probably have, in the URL part, you'd have like the ID of the thing that you want. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to actually post this message that will have the ID that we want from this thing. And that's just a design decision. And what that does is it actually simplifies our routing process, right? So now, most of the time, what people need from these frameworks is like a routing system that can have variables inside your routes, and you can have dynamic routes and things of that nature. And what we're doing is we're kind of eliminating that. We're making our routes extremely simple so we don't have to use any of these complicated routing systems. And and that way, all of our stuff is very uniform, and we're basically using posts for everything, which is nice. So we're going to use a post here, and then we need the data, which will basically be the name, which is m dot data, right? So I don't really need to do that, but this kind of tells us that we're looking for a name. And then we're going to do file contents, and we'll just ignore the errors, and we'll do os read file, and it will be the data directory plus the name. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a widget JSON. Ooh, let's see. Actually, we don't even need that. We want to create a message actually, and we'll do w.write. Actually, in this case, I do want to catch this error, because if it's not there, then we'll just send a message back to the user. So we'll at least cover some of these errors. So if error is not nil, we're going to do a w.write. We're going to give them a message, and it'll be an error. Widget does not exist. Otherwise, the widget does exist, and what we'll do is we'll have a write message data, and we're going to say string file contents. And that makes things very easy. And there we go. Now we've read the widget. And now one of the things that you might notice is that we're doing the same thing over and over again, right? So we're checking the method, and we're reading the body and getting a message from it. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, since I'm doing this a lot, I'm going to make a function for this, right? I'm going to make a function that will allow us to do this thing in a more compact form. So we'll do a func, and we'll say get message from body. And we're going to need we're actually going to bring in the HTTP response writer, and we're also going to bring in the HTTP request. And we're going to return the message. Okay, so in this case, we're going to do this. In fact, yeah, okay. So just hang on with me for a second. And what we're going to do is return m, but we're also going to return an error, so that way we know when to quit. So return message errors.new okay, and then here we're going to do nil, which is good. And so that way, what we'll do is we'll replace all of this stuff, right? We'll replace all of this stuff with m for message, so get message from body. And, oh, this will also be error. And we'll get WR. And if error, like nil, we'll be able to return because we've already sent this message up here, right? So that'll be nice. We could have designed it a little bit differently, but that should work. And now we can use this same thing down here. Oops. So that, notice that makes each one of these things a little bit more compact. And we'll just do this for the update, and we'll do this for the delete as well. So you can see this thing is going pretty fast. So let's do the update. And what we're going to do for the update is we're going to kind of do a cop-out on some of this stuff. Well, yeah, so what I'm thinking about right now is, like, for the update, typically what you would do is you would check to see if something actually exists and then modify the pieces that you want to. But I think what we'll do is we'll just make a note, and we'll say that note modify the pieces the user is allowed to. Instead, we're just copying create. And so we'll do the same thing as we do for create. There we go. And then for delete, what we'll do is we'll get the same thing that we did for read, where we get the name from the data. Whoops. And then we can say os remove data dir plus name. Now, in a real database, what you'd want to do is you'd probably want to just deactivate this thing instead of actually removing it. But this is for simplicity's sake. So there we go. I'm not sure how long it's actually been. I've probably already spent too much time on this, but let's see. There's probably some build errors. So let's go ahead and do that. So I have some spelling errors. So let's go to 45. Request. And then, oh yes, we need errors. Let's also go funct w main, so that will format our file. And let's see what we've got here. So I can't do IO read all. So that means, is it, which Go version do I have? Go version. Oh, 115, that's right. Okay, so I'm not up to 116 on this machine yet, so that means I can't do IO. I have to do IO util. Okay, that's good. And we're redeclaring W at line 62. Oh, yeah, widget. Yes, okay, I can't do that, right? Widget and widget. There we go. Same thing probably happens down and below. Same thing here. I have an older version of Go, so let's do IOUtil, right file. And where is it? Over here, IOUtil. Oh no, I created a new folder or a new file. Let's remove it. And we're almost there. So 73. This one also has to be IOUtil. And we redeclared W. And yeah, that's right. This has to be a widget. So there we go. So now we've got this Widgets API, right? So now we have a Widgets API serving at 8080, but we have no client yet. And you know what? I think that was good for a start. So by the way, I actually just did that. I have no script or anything for this. I'm just kind of doing it off the cuff. So that's why I'm making a little bit of mistakes here, because I'm just making it up as I go. But you can see that in a relatively small amount of time, we created a little CRUD API for our widgets. And so even though we don't have a database or anything like that, we kind of filled this in. Like typically what you do for some of these things, like I said, you would have an object relational mapper or some kind of interface that you have to a database. But I think what we'll do is we'll have, next time, we'll create a little front end for this thing. We'll create a web front end to show how I kind of approach the front end to web applications. And that will allow us to both test and also kind of show off this API. So thank you for watching. Till next time.